a second for this to come up anyway. Let's see. That screen two. Oh, there we go. I think this is it. Everyone see the PowerPoint slide?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate some of your time on a Thursday morning. Let's go ahead and jump into our agenda. Let me see. I get this on the slide. Presentation. There we go. Okay. So for our agenda today, and it's open to if other folks have some things they want to talk about, we've got an open discussion time at the end as well. Let's see, we're going to go over a draft scope of work that we talked about last time. We settled on 3 areas, and we're going to talk about those, and then we're going to talk about how we might approach and assessment methods to look at each of those topic areas from an organizational culture standpoint. Paul Cadota's got a good, nice utility partner example, which will, I think, really help highlight some of the things we'd like to talk about under organizational trust. Then we're going to define that a little bit, and that's going to be an interactive portion. So this is the part where we really need your help to. We'll use the pardon. We'll use the raise hand feature so that we can make sure we don't talk over each other, and but we definitely want you all to participate. And then we're going to develop some teams for the 3 topic areas. So we've got trust. Again, we've got trust, intrinsic motivation, and collaboration. So you might want to be thinking about that in the back of your mind if there's an area that has particular interest for you that you'd like to work on. So we're going to break into 3 groups. You can join more than one group, so that is okay. If you want to work on several of them, we certainly would not stop you from doing that. So that's our agenda for today. This is just a reminder who's on this group, and I think this list is still accurate, isn't it, Cello?
No, it doesn't include some people like me.
Okay, so I'll have to update that. So let me make a note of that. Update the group list. Thanks, Alice. All right. Okay. All right, and so I mentioned the 3 focus areas that we landed on last week: trust. And we're going to talk today about individual versus organizational trust. And we had an interesting discussion about that. And Paul's going to lead that part of it. I'm really looking forward to that. And we'd like some discussion under that area as well, too, because there's some real differences, I think, between individual trust and organizational trust. We're going to talk about intrinsic motivation. If folks want to work in this area, this is one that would be really good to help define what we mean by that. And maybe that group can help do that, the group that wants to work on intrinsic motivation. And then the last one we talked about for focus area is collaboration. And that's definitely a cultural attribute. And that's, how well do folks work together? And a lot of that, again, we talk about, I think about circles, right? There's your immediate team, there's the next larger group, and then there's of course other groups like that around the organization. So collaboration certainly also has a number of different organizational aspects to it as well. So for each of those topics, we need to define maturity models. We want to describe a range of capabilities, like from really bad to excellent, that will describe how well something can be done. And that's one of our exercises today. We're going to do that on organizational trust. We want to identify the best assessment methods. And so in other words, how do you know where you're at? That's one of the things that oftentimes can stifle these things because with people systems, and I bet you've probably all seen this. With people systems, it's hard to see progress. It's one of these things that's slow, but a really good way to see progress is to look back, right? Where were we a year ago? Where were we 2 years ago, or even 6 months? How much change has occurred? Because oftentimes that's really the only way you can do it. But we want to try to bring some quantification to this. So how do we have assessment methods for the as is? And then we want to talk about a system model so that we can support that assessment. We want to describe what would achieving trust look like? How do you do that in a specific case? And then we want to identify the desired state. In other words, what and this may be different for every organization, but I would guess especially with an issue of trust, there's probably not a lot of differences in terms of what people want as a desired state. We probably want a lot of individual trust and a lot of organizational trust. So my guess is on that one in particular, there may not be, but we want to describe the attributes of that. Well, what does it look like if we had a lot of organizational trust throughout the utility? What does that look like, and how do we describe it? So how do we know? And then we need them, and of course, then we want, one of the main parts of this project is, how do we get from A to B, right? How do we get from as is to be? And those methodologies are really going to be important in terms of what do we produce as products, right? So what methodologies have worked for folks? What methodologies do you want to try? What things do you want to look at in terms of how do we get from an as is, place where we are today to the place where we want to be in the future? So Paul's got a really good example of some of the things that they're working on in Metro Vancouver in terms of trust in particular. And so Paul, I'm going to let you take it, and then just let me know when you want to advance to the next slide.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Mm-hmm. So at Metro Vancouver, we're looking at various ways of measuring trust, and I think the group leads have sort of identified trust as being the foundation of everything, whether it be a good organizational culture or high-performing teams, or just having a friendly culture within your team. And this slide here actually comes from Stephen Covey, and I believe it's from his book Speed of Trust. And in that, he identifies essentially two key characteristics, one being character and one being competence, and that you needed both for sure. And under each category, like character, he has identified intent and integrity, and various aspects below that as well. And then competence, identifying capability and results. So, if you want to trust someone to do a great job, not only do you need the capacity or the competency of that individual to execute, having the right knowledge and skills and credibility to perform that duty, but to execute it in a fair and purposeful manner. And so, I like to use this as a possible model that we use for trust. So is there any thoughts or comments regarding this graphic and definition of trust?
Alice, please.
Hi, yeah, I guess the only thing that I'm sort of wondering about is this seems to imply that trust is embedded in individuals, or at least the way I heard you describing it, that, you want to trust somebody to do something, they should have character and competence. But I think of trust as more of like a relational thing, that it's not embedded in either person necessarily. So I don't know if you could talk about that a little.
Yeah, for sure it is all about relationships, I think. I mean, trust is really going to both ways. I mean, it's a two-way sort of avenue on trust, and you've all heard the term that you have to earn trust, and to earn trust is through relationships. And Mark talked about individual trust and sort of team trust, but also the organizational trust. And those two dimensions, I think we need to keep in mind, in that even when we talk about organizational trust, it's really about the two individuals. I'm in Department A and someone else is in Department B, and those two individuals need to develop that relationship to gain trust organizationally. And so I think trust ultimately does come down to that relationship. So I think, Alice, you're absolutely right. We need to think of it as two parties, or it's an earned aspect.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always think about it as, when people ask you to trust them, it's like, well, trust is always based on experience, right? So it's like, well, trust me. It's like, if I don't know you, it would be difficult to trust you. Not that you're not trustworthy, but it's always a relation. You're right. It is definitely a relationship thing. I think Dan, you were next.
Yeah, just kind of curious as I was thinking about this framework and thinking about character and competence, and kind of curious of your thoughts of, obviously it's important to have both elements. But I guess there's kind of circumstances where you might entrust someone that has a higher competency level versus maybe some of their character issues, for a particular, I don't know, assignment or task, or vice versa, that, a particular circumstance might require someone that's just rock solid character, but maybe, they don't quite have the competency level that you would hope for, but you can maybe balance that out by bringing in other people to support them or something like that. So I guess kind of curious your thoughts about that balance between character and competence, making, decisions about who to trust.
Mark or Cello, did you want to?
Sure, I can give it a try. I think that it is true that trust is an aspect of relationship between different individuals. However, especially considering the topic that we're focused on, which is organizational culture, I think that the organizational culture has an impact of how these individuals are going to relate to each other, and this within the organization, not out there, after work playing on the baseball field, but what does organization do to hurt or help people to trust each other, and especially what leads to business impact is collaborate across between different units in the organization. So I think this model has really good things about it. And if we take into account the perspective, in addition to individuals relating to individuals, the atmosphere and the conditions that organization creates, that makes it, that to a degree shapes the relationship between these individuals. And I can tell you, I mean, from my personal experience working with a number of utilities around the world, if you show up in the field and you say, I'm here from downtown, I'm here to help you, almost universally, and I worked in Japan and England and all over the US, it doesn't matter where you are, you get kind of strange looks. So I think that there are some organizational aspects that play into how people relate to each other. So I'll stop there. Does that answer your question, Dan, at all?
Yeah, that was good. I think more than anything, I was just kind of processing the model out loud a little bit and just kind of looking for some feedback, and that's good.
I think that the value of this model would come is that if we have maturity models, and these are components of trust, we can say if the components such as, for example, transparency, whether that can be part of the maturity model to say, well, in an organization whose culture is not very mature, there's very little transparency. In an organization on the other side, on the 5, on the excellent is, there's a lot of transparency. So this model gives us a lot of useful hints, for example, including such things as fairness. because if people perceive that the environment, that the conditions the organization creates are fair, it will have an impact, you know, how well we can do projects and how well we can work with people and how people can trust each other and stuff like that. So does that help, Dan?
You bet. Thanks, Cello.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thanks. Carolyn?
Yes, I'm particularly interested in this notion of the trust to the organization as a whole. And I totally agree that trust is a two-way street and it's a relationship thing. But what I've really been noticing is that often it's not difficult for people to have trust when they're collaborating individual to individual, but so often there's this mistrust of the organization. So the individual you're dealing with will say, well, my hands are tied, or, sorry, but I can't do it because that's the policy. And so there becomes this eroding of trust because there's this faceless kind of thing lurking in the background that can't be trusted. And it's indicative of the, I guess, what's institutionalized in the organization and related to the bureaucracy. I'm not sure, but I think if there's some institutionalized processes that are there to actually be transparent about the trust and to have these characteristics very visible in an institutionalized way, then I think that might help solve the kind of that faceless, the trust of the faceless bureaucracy. I'm not quite sure how to articulate it, but I just wanted to comment on that.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. I think that we talked about this yesterday when we were preparing for the meeting today. It's like, it's very common for like, well, I trust the people I work with in my immediate group, but I don't trust anybody. Once you get beyond that, the trust really starts fading quickly, if not almost immediate. So it's a very interesting, please.
Sorry, but what I'm trying to say is that it's not the individual. Like you might trust someone, say in the purchasing department, or that individual is trying their hardest and they're really communicating with you and you really trust them, but you just don't trust what's behind the individual in an undefined way. Like you can't point to a person that you don't trust. It's that organization, it's that other being.
Good point. Thank you. I think, Doug, I think you were next, and then Zonetta and Kathleen.
I just want to build on Caroline's comment. A lot of times it's sort of the organizational practices and policies that you don't trust. It's not the individual. If you build a culture of, it's safe to go out and make mistakes, it's safe to go out and experiment with new business practices, and it's okay. I think there's a lot of organizational trust that's built. A lot of that comes with transparent communication, with everyone's motives being understood and everyone's motives sort of being on the table. And I think there's a lot of organizational work that has to happen in order for that organizational trust to develop and no pun intended, be trusted.
Thank you. Kathleen.
You're on mute, Kathleen.
Just building on what other people say from the organizational level, I do see that as a lot. What Caroline was saying, that you don't trust, the man, some big system behind it all. And I think a lot of that is transparency, like what are they doing and why are they doing it, and it's not fair, and everybody else gets a raise and I don't get a raise. And do these people know what they're doing? I mean, all of these characteristics that you have up there, I think that there's a big challenge to communicate what is the agency, what is the organization, how are they fair and knowledgeable and credible and caring and all of these characteristics.
And I think if you remember back to our meeting last week, Todd talked about having these meetings with staff and trying to get out and be more visible and start to create that transparency, which I think is something we'll want to talk about in terms of a part of the methodology for trying to create organizational trust. Let's see, who was next? Let's see. Carolyn, do you still have a, no? Okay. And then I think Cello, you were next.
I think somebody else had their hand up.
Alice's. Yeah, Al.
That's Alice.
Zonetta
Yeah.
had her hand up for a while, but she took it down.
And Todd Swingles.
I just took it down. I still wanted to
Please.
say something. I just took it down so I wouldn't be up twice. But
Oh, okay. Please.
I'm in no rush, so I can wait.
You go ahead, Zonetta. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
please.
No, I want to just echo what everyone has said, but I wanted just to go back and talk about the individual trust, because I took a course through my MBA, continuing education, and they were talking about how to get to the organizational trust. And I just want to emphasize about it still is those same skills that you use to do individual trust, because I think we assume that we have that. I think we're forced to try to work when we work with that within our own teams. But it talked about using those same skills of how do we build individual trust on how we also can translate that. And that's a precursor to doing the organizational level. So I just wanted to just emphasize how that we can't negate that's an assumption that exists. And how they talked about taking a hybrid of that to build the organizational, because that is a huge thing. So I agree with everybody saying, but I think I'm interested in how we can use that to bridge over.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the intersection between personal, the characteristics that create personal trust versus organizational trust. And, the way I think about that is you could have this, if you have a big incongruity, let's say that you're a high integrity person, but the organization you work in doesn't seem to act that way very often, you're going to have this incongruity, which will make it you'll be very unhappy at that organization. And I think conversely, if you work in an organization where you have a lot of trust and a lot of integrity and openness, and if you're a person that doesn't see that necessarily as the right thing. I'm not trying to make value judgments, but again, it creates that incongruity. And we talk all the time about hiring to the culture, right? You want to hire to the culture that you're trying to achieve with your organization. And so often we've talked about in my organization, what characteristics do we want folks to have? I mean, what things do we want them to demonstrate? You'll be happy here if you like to explore new things, if you like to do new things. If you don't, if you want heavily on routine, you may not like it here.
Right. Yeah, and that's important as a precursor to getting to the collaboration part too. I mean, we have some collaboration that's forced, and we learn how to do that, but trust is a real important component of that. So that's all I wanted just to add.
Yeah, thank you, Zonetta. And I think Cello, you were next, and then
yeah, but I would prefer for others to go before me, like Todd, for example.
Todd, and then Alice.
Yeah.
Yeah, just I don't know. I guess from my perspective, I think first of all, we talk about kind of almost like individual trust as a given. I don't know that I agree with that. I think there's a lot of places where there's not individual trust in organizations, some of which is how the organization works, some of which is just individuals that you work with. Yeah. So I don't think it's reasonable to assume that that's a given. Right. As an organization, to me, there is an element of what the organization does that builds to trust, but I really look at organizational trust as simply an assemblage of a lot of individual relationships and the trust that is built across those relationships. So for me, organizational trust is not as much something to focus on as it is to focus on how to build individual relationships and connections that ultimately manifest as organizational trust. Because organizations for me aren't beings, they're just an assemblage of people. And as we put people together in the right way and get each individual focusing on the actions that they can take, that's where for me I see that organizational trust will come. because you can have, I as a leader can say, here's everything that I expect. And if it's not manifest in the organization at every person, then the organization doesn't have that feeling, that sense. So that's, for me, that's one of the challenges. And actually, we've got a managers meeting this afternoon, and we're having a discussion on our new vision statement, which is actually Trust That Toho Cares. And it's a little farther. It's our customers, our employees, and our stakeholders trust that Toho cares, but then it goes into a variety of actions and work areas and functions so that every employee in the organization can identify those elements that do tie into this character and competence piece of what in their job do they do to build trust amongst the people that they touch. So for me, that's where a little bit of the challenge comes, because I guess I'm a strong believer in that the investment comes at the individual level to ultimately build that organizational trust.
All right, thank you. It was interesting, yeah, from the inside out. I think it's the incongruities can often happen when the organization espouses one thing, but it really what you experience is different than that. Alice.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're also thinking about trust in both directions. I think we spend a lot of time, any organization does, in trying to figure out how do we build trust in the organization? How do we get people sort of at the bottom to trust the people at the top and to trust the leadership in the organization? But oftentimes I think management doesn't spend enough time thinking about how do we build our own trust in employees? You know, is the trust both ways? Do we trust that our employees are going to do what they should do? Or do we feel like we need to sort of hold on to all of that power and all that control, which is a real lack of trust in the rest of the organization? And so I think we have to make sure that we're thinking about this both ways. It's not just we want everybody out there to trust us. It's we also have to like flex our muscles and start trusting them as well, and trying to figure out what we need to do on our end, and not trying to like judge whether or not they're trustworthy, but are we worthy of trusting?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a really good point. Mert.
Good morning. Oh, that actually came up better as the first word I said today. So I think that is this. It's kind of parallel. I think the management has the environment top down for the organization, so that bottom up people do trust each other, and people also do trust, if you will, the management that sets the tone for the organization's mission. So I mean, I see it as two parallel. I don't quite see it as you mentioned, Todd, the individuals kind of like building that for the organization. Maybe it's the same thing, but I kind of see it kind of like a top-down meets like a bit of a bottom-up environment that actually helps each other out, sort of making it like bigger than the sum of its parts.
Good. Thanks, Mert. Todd, do you have your hand up? Do you comment?
Well, I think it's both. I agree with the comment. There's both directions. I guess ultimately it has to be supported by management. That's why we're setting that vision there. The tone has to be set. I think in many cases it's where things are viewed as an organizational action or something like that. That I'm a believer that ultimately success does build from the bottom up. And so, but that's not without us, helping set that tone, set the priority, encouraging it, leading by example, all of those pieces. So I think we're on the same page in general. I don't think it's just, going to happen completely organically. There has to be a connection with leadership. But for me, that part of that is that even that is a personal connection with leadership too. So to help emphasize that as a priority.
Yeah, thank you. Cello.
Yes, I think I really like a lot of the things that Todd says. I want to say what my personal experience is. When Mark and I worked at the utility 35 years ago together at the same utility, I eventually was in charge of IT. I've never been in the same room. I didn't know what our executive director looked like. I wouldn't be able to recognize him on the street. What Todd is talking about is a very different approach where he actually mentioned on a previous meeting that he goes out in the field and talks to people. On the other hand, later I became a consultant and I was working with Philadelphia Water Department. And one night I'm going back to my hotel. It was about 10:30 at night, and they were fixing a pipe break. And there was there were a few workers, and there was a guy who was the commissioner, the head of the Philadelphia was there at 10:30 at night on a work day. So it was a completely different deal. So it says both good and bad things, and that is that people who are on the top of the organization can make a significant impact, but it also reinforces the idea that the top-down sort of style of command and control is the dominant one in our public sector. And I think one way I think about it is how good things happen and how bad things happen. So I look at, are good things happening because of individuals or because of the system? Because if they happen because of the individual, they're less lasting and less enduring. If they're because of the system, they are more enduring and more stable. And the person on the top can do a lot to influence how the system behaves.
Thanks, Chell. Doug.
If you were to look at our particular organization a couple of years ago, from the inside out, you would find you were an organization that probably didn't trust a lot. Like some of the other bureaus at the city of Portland, it's often been described as sort of a bunker mentality. And we consciously chose to sort of break that mold when we put our strategic business plan together over the last couple of years. And we forced a lot of interaction between people through a large risk assessment process that took probably 70 or 80 people out of their normal roles, put them through a process and forced them to work together to identify and analyze risk and then look at management strategies and what are we going to do about it. And I think to almost a person that's worked through that process now, they'll say that communications around the organization now are completely different than what they used to be. People are working sort of cross work groups now that didn't even almost know each other before working through this process. So there are activities and there's actions that you can take to sort of build trust in the organization. And I'm hoping that as we look at this model, we're working towards, here are actions we can suggest to folks as you're putting your business process workflows together that might move you towards an organization that is different than the one you're in today before you implement this workflow.
These are really great ideas. Please don't, we've got this recorded because these are the kinds of things we're going to get into as we talk about methodologies for creating organizational trust. So yeah. This is really good stuff. Todd, I know you've got a really good example. That's a good example, Doug. So we've already got a good start on this. We're getting we got about 20 minutes left, and we have an exercise to do. I wonder if Paul, you had another slide. Let's see here. You want to cover this real quickly, Paul, so we can?
Yeah, I'll just cover it very quickly. So at Metro Vancouver, we're looking at possibly rolling out a psychological safety survey. And psychological safety is one of the key characteristics identified through Google's work team initiative, and they were trying to figure out what made fantastic teams fantastic. And the number one characteristic was psychological safety. And this is something that Dr. Amy Edmondson has been researching quite a bit. And you can just Google psychological safety survey, Amy Edmondson, and she essentially has 6 questions that you can ask as part of the survey and get people's responses. And one of the things that we've adapted for questions that we're going to use at Metro is to identify whether or not the statements people strongly disagree or strongly agree with them. And so things like when makes a mistake, it's not held against that person. Mm. And 5 more questions there. And the way we've got it set up, it's in a spreadsheet at this point, and we asked the respondent to provide a response from the perspective of working within your own team, your own tight team. And then another lens would be to look at it from an organizational perspective and respond to the same 6 questions with your organizational team, the broader team in mind. And we've done a few tests with a few individuals, and there's definitely differences between the core sort of individual teams versus the organizational team. And so that's all I wanted to share with this slide.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. If you haven't had a chance, she has a book out. It's called "Creating Psychological Safety at Work." It's well done, and she's, as Paul noted, she's a researcher, and so she spent better part of her career researching these things. It's definitely worth a read. So I definitely recommend that book. Mert, you had your hand up, and I'm sorry I didn't call on you before.
Thanks, Mark. So I don't know. Maybe it's best to wait for this for the system model meeting, but maybe not. So I'm just gonna say it. But one thing I want to sort of caution. One thing I've noticed is that we are sort of all like, I think, engineering culture centric organizations, even though not all of us directly work in the engineering departments, if you will. And I think there is a little bit of a sort of intrinsic like engineering quality about maybe like being a little suspicious, which is kind of like antitrust. When it comes to our dealings with the outside world, like contractors are going to trying to cheat us, and we don't trust the regulators to do the right thing here because they got to think for me, or just even sometimes to ourselves, we don't really trust in our own skill set. I think we need to be sort of like adjusting or keeping that bias in mind when we talk about the system model, perhaps. I think it was a more appropriate comment for the previous slide, but we can maybe use it for later.
No, thank you. Yeah, we record this, and I'll definitely be going back because I can't facilitate and get a good set of notes at the same time. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike Sweeney, sorry.
Yeah,
Mike Sweeney.
Real quick, Mark, I don't want to insert this as a wrinkle, but I just recall years ago taking a test myself and don't know which one it was. I'm sure there's plenty to do with this, but one of the scores that came out is a psychometric thing. One of the scores that came out is a degree of being predisposed to trust. In other words, are you a trusting person? And some people, I mentioned this because we're talking about team level and organizational level trust, but there may be a predisposition in some individuals that just for whatever reason, they're very cautious, or some are very open and very trusting. Maybe that's something to put as a point. Maybe it's an opportunity to put something in the bibliography, but there is that to overcome even on an individual basis for some folks that are just not predisposed by whatever reason.
Yeah, good point. And it could be just past experience, good life experience, right?
Absolutely, right. Yeah. Oops, wrong thing. I'm raising and lowering my hand. Absolutely, it could be just possibly cultural, but it could be past experience.
Yeah. Joseph.
Yes, good morning. I was trailing in and out trying to deal with a few things, so I may be repeating some things here. But on this, the psychological safety, we had an outside consultant come in to speak to our wastewater facilities division last week, and she addressed this thing exactly. And the way that she approached it was by asking 3 questions. Number 1 would be, do I feel respected? 2 is, does my employer value me? And 3 is, does my work matter? She had, and probably there's a lot of intersect or similar material from Dr. Edmondson book, but the study that she quoted or alluded to in the training yielded I think 75% of organizations that responded yes, where people responded yes to all 3 questions, were organizations that were meeting their goals. So the connection being, you know, if I feel valued and I have that psychological safety, then that trust is built, and then more than likely I'm going to work together with my teammates and to build an organization that is highly effective and performs well. So I totally buy into that whole concept of you know, allowing our employees to feel valued and respected. And I think one of the challenges to kind of go back to the slide prior is when it comes to trust, it's you kind of have it bifurcated into competence and character. There are a lot of individuals in our organization here, and I'm sure in others, that are highly competent. They are the go-to people for all things technical, and you absolutely trust their judgment when it comes to technical issues, but they are severely lacking in the other component of character for all those things that are listed in that tree. And unfortunately, what that does is it really nullifies their expertise, because they may not be treating their people well. They may not be they may not have the personality to encourage others, and whatever they know is just head knowledge. And at the end of the day, you're not progressing. You might actually be going backwards by promoting these individuals to higher levels. And so it really requires us to think a little bit more critically about the types of people that we hire and the types of people that we promote, and look at various metrics to get the best balance that we can.
Interesting observations. Thanks, Joseph. Cello.
Yes, I just wanted to, I just sent a link on the chat, which is to a organizational culture in one of the folders for organizational culture, and it's just an obituary for a person that I have a very high regard for. His name is Stanislav Petrov, and I'm not sure that you ever heard of him. It's just a page, but I think it illustrates the difference between an individual culture of an individual and somebody. It reminded me when Mert said that there's like an engineering mindset and a broader organization. So for those of you who are interested, it may be worth reading. And also the second thing is we also have a workforce track, and a lot of the things that are being said here are being said in the workforce track. So what we'll have to do is get together with the initially with just the leads of these two efforts to consolidate, make sure that we're not make sure that we integrate our efforts and have something overall that makes sense. Because the issues of trust and all of these things have been coming up on the workforce topic as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to parse these things real tightly. They
yes.
They definitely connect.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm gonna thanks very much, Paul. I'm gonna move on to the next slides. We got about 8-10 minutes left. So I thought if we could take maybe 5 minutes just to do this. We've been talking about some of these things already, but if we wanted to look at an organizational characteristics in terms of having organizational trust, what would it look like in terms of what would a level 1 where there's literally no organizational trust and level 5, a high organizational trust, what sorts of things would it look, what would it look like? So we might start defining this. Now there's obviously there can be levels in between, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, and 4. But I thought if we just took a few minutes and started brainstormed a little bit about what these characteristics might look like, it would be helpful for the group that's working on it. And then hopefully the other 2 groups where they can create some definition of a maturity model for the other 2 topics, the intrinsic motivation and the collaboration. So I just threw a couple out there. These may or may not be the best ones, but if you had no organizational trust, oftentimes you get a culture of blame, right? So the one thing you always want to make sure of is I can't be to blame for this. So people, so if something goes wrong in an organization, the first thing it does is it goes and tries to find who's responsible for this, who screwed up, who made the mistake, right? In level 5, at least my thought is that you've got responsibility and accountability, but it's without a blame culture, right? If something goes wrong, we don't look for the person who quote screwed up, messed up. We go and try and figure out, well, why did that happen? Because we understand that that person had good intentions, right? We trust that they had good intent. They were trying to do the right thing, or that group was trying to do the right thing. Maybe it's a system issue. And frankly, my opinion, most things, when there's problems, it's a system issue, right? And it's rarely ever that one person has full responsibility for something when things go wrong. So those are the 2 examples. That's the 2 ends that I thought of. And but I'd be love to hear other folks, and I'll type them in here. Oops, I got to go back. Sorry. So Alice.
Yeah, just on that one specific one, I see a level 5. Like I see this as more of a level 4 that consistently throughout the organization you think of responsibility and accountability without blame. But a level 5 is more, I think, what Doug was talking about earlier, that at least in some areas, you like making mistakes is good. It shows that you're trying new things and that you're experimenting, and that it's almost seen as a positive when you mess up. And of course it's different, if it means that unclean water is going to people, it's one thing. But in some areas that there is that sort of culture of experimentation.
Great, thank you. Joseph, do you have one to add to this? And then Zonetta.
Oh, no, I forgot to put it down, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Zonetta, please.
I think when you have a level 1, I think you have just departments are siloed. When you have a low level of organizational trust, everybody's working separately. And then just to tag on with Ms. Broadley said, with that, we talk about mistakes are expected and okay. I think about that in terms of a spirit of innovation, because innovation is going to involve you making mistakes, and that's okay. That's what I wanted to add.
Great, thank you. Cello, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just very quickly, the district where I work has been around for, I don't know, maybe 70 years. They've never issued a boiled water notice. They have 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24-hour operation, and the water has to be perfect. So we're not Google where somebody's search is not going to work. We're not, Facebook where, the photo is going to be blurry. We also have to deal with the fact that we're an organization that on some levels, mistakes should not be tolerated. I mean, there's not much room, because I think a lot of people in the field, if you tell them, mistakes are okay, we just have to kind of frame it and temper it somehow, because as a person who works on control systems, I immediately got in a panic when somebody said mistakes, okay.
Yeah, and I tried to acknowledge that in what I was saying too. In our business, there has to be some sort of, limits put around what you can and cannot make mistakes in. But I think in our cultures as organizations, we've unnecessarily extended that to everything we do. And so we are so afraid of making mistakes in any aspect of what we do that we're like paralyzed. And so I absolutely agree that there are some places where mistakes can't happen, but I think we've taken it too far.
Great.
Okay.
Risk
Yeah,
adverse.
thank you. I've got 2 more hands up, and then we're gonna. I just wanted to get a conversation started. Then we're gonna move on because I want to try and get the teams established before we got about 5 minutes left. So I think Dan was next, and then Kathleen. And I apologize if I get these out of order.
Yeah, I would just add like level 1 is like an energy draining. Like it's hard to get just simple things done, right?
Yeah.
And then for level 5, it's, it's more energy giving, or just people have more energy, and it's easier to get at least the easy things done so that you can focus on the more challenging things.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. You're like, this is going to take me talking to a whole bunch of people. What if it was trust, I could just one phone call and it's done. Yes, exactly what you're saying. Yeah, thank you for that. And then, sorry, it was Kathleen was next, please, and then Doug and Alice.
Thanks, Mark. So mine is really more of a question in terms of the competency side, and kind of tying back to what Cello was saying. Is high performance an indicator of a high trust, or is that not? And I think the same thing with the energy giving. High performing and engaged employees. Are those, I guess, symptoms or causes or effects?
I think they're outcomes. That's what I think. I think they're outcomes of a high trust environment.
I think if we just put them on the list and then we'll sort them out later.
We'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
And then Doug and then Alice, please.
This is maybe my personal perspective, but on level 1, it looks like rules, bureaucracy rules.
Yes.
And high level organizational trust is we're flexible in how we get our work done.
Good one. Thank you. I like the way you put it too. And then, sorry, was it Alice, please?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar. What I was going to say to what Doug was saying is that in a level 1, all decisions have to be made by the top. There's no there's total control by the top of an organization, whereas in a level 5, appropriate decisions are distributed throughout, and people at the top trust that lower levels down are going to be making the right decisions.
Good one. Thank you.
Yep.
Mike. Sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Okay. Mike, please.
So, Mark, I was just gonna say on like level 1 seems to be like a very like self-centered type thinking of the people, right? Everyone would be like concerned about themselves and just thinking about how they look. Whereas level 5, I mean, I don't know if it would be like organizationally focused or even like greater good focused type thinking.
Dang it. Sorry, yeah, I get what you mean. I'll get this down. It's response. The typing's all right. So it was self-centered. There we go. And the other one would be greater good to greater good. Yes, that's a good one. Great. Well, I'm gonna. Oh, Parajat. All right, last chance because we got 1 minute left.
Yes, a quick one. This is more piggybacking on what Les and Doug were saying, that probably no trust is more micromanagement and trying to understand what everybody is doing, whereas 5 is more you are empowered and decision making is not just happening at the top.
Great, thank you. Well, we're really at time. I'm gonna call it there for a second, and then what I'm gonna do is we need some folks who would be interested, and then we've got 3 groups. You can join one or all. We've got trust, intrinsic motivation, and the collaboration. So what I'm going to do as a follow-up to this meeting, I'm going to write up some of these notes, and then I'm going to ask you all to sign up for one. So if you don't sign up for one, I'll keep hounding you. So you don't want that, and I don't want that. So sign up for at least one, please. And then if you'd like to lead that group, that would be fantastic. And we can have more than one lead because we can work well together. We can collaborate. So I'm going to send that out along with some notes from this meeting. And our next meeting, look at that, it's the Thursday before Thanksgiving. So can't believe it's almost here already. But thank you all for today. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it. Any final closing thoughts or comments from anyone?